Entrepreneurship
on 702.
And this Andisa Ramavhunga is my guest, Group Chief Advisor at Ntiyiso Consulting Group. My brother, good evening to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, Aubrey. It's always lovely to be here.
Yeah, man. So tonight we continue in our conversation around strategy, but we're talking more about the human capital in any organization and what that human capital means to the strategy. Talk to us. Talk to us.
So, Aubrey, the last time we spoke a lot of strategy and trying to link back all the other elements that we've covered in the various topics that we've had. If I can take you back, we always come back to say strategy. Everything is anchored around strategy. We have spoken marketing. We have spoken business processing at some point in time. We've spoken leadership. We've spoken culture. We've spoken the strategy itself and the 8 building blocks that you use as an entrepreneur. We call it a toolbox. So remember, we are in the science of entrepreneurship, but not the art of it.
Yeah.
The science, it says these are the, I wouldn't call them tick box exercise, but these are things to look at when you're analyzing your business and making all those strategic decisions and obviously the implementation decision. So we started by illustrating what a strategy is, and I would like us maybe to always come back to that because it's an anchor of our conversation. And then we moved to a notion of what we call design, organizational design, which is how do you design an organization that is able to implement that winning strategy. And obviously people are a key factor within that. I think in fact, we've never spoken people at all. We've spoken marketing, we've spoken systematization of businesses, we've spoken sales, we've spoken customer relation management, except that there are people who make this thing, when you were opening the topic, that there are people who do these things. There are people who drive sales, right? There are people who drive product and deliver of that product. There are people who then support the after sales. So at the end of the day, the business, I would argue, is about people. Because if you really get the right people in the right place with the right motivation and the right attitudes, you are able to transcend a lot of these strategic issues we've been talking about and really be able to build building blocks, or we call it codification. Because if you have the right people, they can come in without anything being documented and they can learn and implement with you as you're driving your business forward. But in the process, be able to document what works for the business vis-a-vis you driving as an entrepreneur, driving all that codification. So people are at the center of I'll say entrepreneurship. You know, in economics, they say there's 4 ingredients of production, because business is about production, right? They say it's labor, labor is the people component, it's land, it's capital, and entrepreneurship. So really today, we are trying to advocate for people, but we are saying even that when you, as an entrepreneur, you're thinking about that people element, always anchor it to strategy, which is around how a business creates and captures that value.
So I have friends like you who have big businesses who differ on the idea as to every quarter inviting the whole company, from janitor to CEO, to come and sit down and listen to a strategic report of the company. Where are we? This is what we wanted to do. These were our budgets and this. And then there are those who'll say, no, you don't have to have everybody involved. You don't have to have everybody in the business involved in that kind of report. Usually after that report has been done, there's a few drinks and everybody sort of can mingle around. And the idea is that we are fostering a situation where people can get to know each other and understand that while they have different roles to play within the organization, they are part of this same animal that is trying to achieve a particular goal. That's one school of thought. Yep. And then there are other executives and strategists and people who run companies who will say, listen, for those kinds of reports, we want to have key people. In other words, the champions in every division of the strategy of the company. Because it's a waste of time to be talking high-level strategy to everybody when sometimes there are very intricate ideas to that strategy that must be made. And so to try and dumb it down is actually not to tell the proper story. And therefore, have the champions, have the line managers be the people that are present at a report of that nature. And both sides, I imagine, have some sort of merit. I'm interested to know about where you fall in that space, but also try and get from you, to what extent does the janitor form part of the strategy of the company? At a sentimental level, I get it, right? But there are executives, CEOs who are passionate about that, who say, when we have a strategic report, even the janitor must be there. Very often the poor janitor is bored out of his mind in that in that meeting, or maybe not. Where do you stand as far as that is concerned? And to what extent is that an important conversation for what we're trying to talk about here, the people within a strategy of a company?
Yeah. So you're putting me on the spot, Aubrey, because remember, I'm a consultant. So I can't seem to be advocating one method over the other, except that there are key principles why we do what we do, particularly when it comes to what I call the dissemination of strategy, because that's what you are talking about. So, and again, there are school of thoughts, by the way, to just whet your appetite around to what extent do the lower ranks play a role in the formulation of strategy, right? But you now have almost even taken the view that says, look, there's the upper echelon that does the strategy, and theirs maybe is the dissemination. I guess that's what you are saying. Others are saying you don't need to enroll everyone. You only need to enroll a few that are key, vis-a-vis where you need to enroll everyone, right? And I always come back to say, but what is it that we are trying to achieve? So for me, enrolling everyone to the strategy is critical, even if it's a janitor, because simply for the fact that, remember, the strategy ultimately will be implemented by the people. If you are in a growth phase and it's a growth strategy and you've got stuff around increasing access to market and sales, remember you need to back that up with operations. The operations are the people who are then going to be responsible for building those products or delivering those services. They need to know where you are going to, and they're able to plan for themselves to say, okay, if we are moving outside of Gauteng as our operating base to KZN, what does that look like, right? Yeah. Does it mean I need to build a factory there, or do I just build a supply chain? Again, there are strategic questions now that need to be answered by the operational people. And by the way, they say strategy, remember, it's when the rubber hits the road. So everyone is involved. It's funny that you mentioned a janitor. You'll remember the US when they're taking the men to the moon, right? I mean, there's a famous story by JFK when they were asking this janitor at NASA, who was saying, where they were asking, what's your role in this company? He said, my role is to get a man to the moon for the first time. So, which is a powerful story, by the way, because remember, the strategy is about vision, right? Strategy gives rise to vision. Hence the concept that says, set your aspirations and what you are trying to achieve as a business. A strategy must then support that. And part of very good leadership, and again, I'd like to refer our readers that we have covered a very big topic on leadership where we're demystifying the various types of leadership. But one of the things that we cannot argue about is the role of leadership in enrolling people to the vision. And this means from your exco, people who report directly to, by the way, we even argue from the board to the exco, to the middle managers, even the lowest of the employees, to the lady that's making tea, to the lady or guy that's a janitor in there. And I'll give you a typical practical examples, right? That says, if your strategy is to fundamentally change your customer management, you want to be so customer centric, you can imagine that when customers visit your premises, the first people they meet, more often than not, will be the security people, will be the frontline people. And whenever they visit the lavatories, they'll meet the janitors there. If they have an opportunity of moving into a boardroom, the people will be offering them some beverages would be the T-Lady. Again, it's to what extent are you wanting to delight your customer? I'm an advocate that says strategies for everyone. It's not a domain of the few. Of course, we can argue about its formulation to say, do you blend the bottom-up approach where you receive feedback from the people who are working on the field, fuse it with your top-down approach, which is about corporate goal setting. It's about knowing what's happening in the environment. Again, the stuff that we've spoken about, and what's happening in your industry, those industry drivers. You blend that together with what you are seeing from your operations. It's a way of encompassing strategy. But I'll be the first to say that most of what at least I've seen and exposed to is the top management setting the strategy. But I would argue that it needs to be disseminated to the entire organization.
Give us a call, 011-883-0702. We're talking about human capital, the people that work for your company. To what extent are they a part of the strategy in terms of the dissemination of the strategy? Because obviously they are part of the strategy. The fact that they are working in that organization, they are part of the strategy.
Absolutely.
But to what extent do they understand the strategy of this company? I mean, how deep do you go? Do you sit over there and talk about the mission and the vision of the company with everybody in the organization? Or is the mission and the vision and the execution of that mission and vision only for line managers? And whatever school of thought you follow, please give me a call and tell me why you follow that. Some will say, we live in a country that espouses ideas of democracy and inclusivity and the idea that we are in this together. Some will say those are beautiful sentiments at a political level. But when you're running a business, you want to cut to the chase as quickly as possible in terms of activating and igniting strategic decisions. And that involving everybody too much can be a little too long-winded. Might be transparent, it might be open, it might be such that it involves everybody and makes everybody feel like they are part of the team. The janitor can say that I'm involved in making the man go to the moon for the first time. It's all great. But ultimately, if we have some goals, that's the conversation that Enoch Odongwane was having a few weeks ago to say, listen, everybody's saying that I need to go and consult, but I can't speak to the whole country. But that is one conversation that is being held in the space of governing a country which espouses ideas of democracy and transparency and all of that kind of stuff, versus the business that must make sure that there's enough shoelaces, right? I've got a target. I've got to make so many shoelaces with this kind of budget, with these kinds of human resources. I don't have time for these kinds of wonderful, beautiful democratic consultations. At which point do we need to curate that space, that conversation, so that it is operationally meaningful?
So there's no one answer fits all, Aubrey. And I did say that we are in the science of business and not the art of it. So context is very important. Important. We developed a framework of how a business develops from startup to scaling to growth to maturity, then decline. And again, you'll appreciate that the type of consultation you would have throughout the evolution of the business will differ. And I'll make it concrete for you. When you are starting out, your value proposition is not tested enough. It's not bedded down enough, particularly if you were in a big tech space, right, where you are trying to innovate a lot. So you want to decentralize as much of the, at least the creative thinking as much as possible, so that people can contribute into stabilizing that business. And I do hope we create a framework at some point in time. So that type of a business would be largely, I would say, decentralized in terms of authority. There's a lot of authority that's delegated there. There's a whole lot of feedback that moves from bottom up. The structures are relatively flat because you want to create that knowledge and collaboration between people, which is a very different business if your business is matured. For example, it's the Standard Banks of the world, the Old Mutual of the world, where the value proposition is largely defined. You don't need to innovate quite a lot. The structure needs to be almost hierarchical just because of the nature of the beast, right? It's a more command and control type of an environment where the rules are strict. It's about setting the rules and following the rules. There's policies about anything and everything. Maybe even sipping tea there is dictated to that extent.
Yeah.
You'll understand there that there's very little autonomy. It's all about command and control. The culture for that will be different. The way that business is structured is probably not as flat as the one that I described before. It's probably much more hierarchical with many layers of management. There's probably even, I'm talking organizations here where you even need to book a room to work in. I've worked for some of those where this one you can just come in the morning and just sit anywhere. We don't need to regulate that. But with others, they are regulated. So again, it depends where you are.
Matters,
in the life cycle. But I would say it also depends because you remember the life cycle is a result of strategy.
Yeah.
Because we and if you can indulge me a bit, Aubrey, we define strategy as driving the wedge between your revenues and your costs, right? Because that's how you create that surplus and value. And then we came and gave three major building blocks of business. We said there's the desirability element, which is about your value proposition, your market segmentation, your customer relationships and channel, which is, by the way, the one that generates the revenue line, the top line you're trying to maximize. And then there's the efficiency side, which is the feasibility side, which is about key activities. It's about the key partnerships. Some of the stuff of your activities you will then outsource. And then key resources. If, for example, you're in tech space or even in the medical space, you have IPs, you've got recipes that define what needs to be done in order to deliver for your value proposition, right, to your market. The critical element in that feasibility element is that key activities, which is work to be done. By the way, that's the basis of our people element in your organizational design. Because if you understand that you have a value proposition that you are delivering to a market segment, you then need to understand the work you need to do to deliver that value proposition to that market segment. Basically, your winning formula. That winning formula.
Those are the operations, right?
Yeah, those are the operations.
Right.
That winning formula dictates a lot of things, by the way, about the type of people you need, the knowledge that they should have, the skills that they should have, the motivation that they have. If you take that element to what I call the organizational design, if again, we've discussed this, I think in our very early stage, where we said there's 4 components to think about the organization. Is those critical tasks where it's understanding the work that needs to be done. You need to quickly then align that to 3 other components, which is about the people. And I've expressed now the people element is about the capacity. How many people do you need? What skills should they have? What knowledge should they have? What training are they bringing, whether it's a degree, it's a diploma, or whatever else that they need to be, because it's about skill and it's about capacity. The other element is around how do you organize these people? I mean, do you define their job narrowly? So one guy does one thing and moves it to the next guy, or do you define it broadly in a sense that one guy does almost everything and there's less division of labor in there? Again, those are concepts you need to think about as an entrepreneur. And finally, it's the cultural element of the people, because if you understand those 3 broad parameters, and I'm trying now to link it to strategy, you'll then understand 1, how many people you need in your organization. 2, what sort of skill set they should have, and qualifications and knowledge. 3, you need to understand how are you going to organize them. After you organize them, how are you going to incentivize them?
Yes.
And again, in part of organization comes these questions you're asking now about whether do you talk to a lot of people or minor people? Do you keep a relatively flat structure? How does the information flow and all those things? And depending on where you are in the life cycle, you then have to make that determination to say, okay, I'm going to go for maybe a much more flat structure because I need rapid feedback. And then I always say culture is very important. And this, by the way, if you whittle it down, is what we call job description. I'm sure people have seen, and you'll see that on the practical skills, right? It's those technical competencies, right, around the work that you'll be doing on a day-to-day basis, and what knowledge should you have to do those jobs. And the final one is those personal attributes. What is it that you do in going about doing this job? Do you need to be a collaborative person? Do you need to be a rule taker? Do you need to be proactive?
I want to go to those segmentations from strategy to work to be done, operations. But let's take some calls. Ephraim is in Kagiso. Good evening to you, Ephraim.
Hello, Mr. Masango and your guest.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
My take on this, Mr. Masango, is in order to execute strategy. Yes, obviously it will start at the top, but the execution of that strategy is null and void without the operations. So it's almost as if the operational part of it has to be broken down into smaller bits and pieces in an integrated way that will involve the rest of the departments. Let me just throw a curveball on this. We currently in South Africa and most of the parts of the world, you have a high suicide rate among men that are within, obviously, the working space. If you are going to set a strategy and not really look into the interpersonal touch of your employees, for instance, you have Mr. So-and-so who's been working for company X who literally hates his job. And now here you are using technical jargon to say, this is the direction that we are going,
Yes.
Just chew it and swallow it. If our destination is Riako Tebe, sit down with your employees, right? Ask them, which is the best route to go to Tebe? You can only use N3. They are the hands and feet. And if they are not openly willing to absorb your strategy, you are just shoving technical jargon among your employees. And the downside of that is you're going to have a high turnover. You have silent quitters. You have people that go to work simply because they're getting a paycheck. Remember, the primary objective of the executive is to impress your shareholders. Majority of your work staff, they just go there because they want a living. If you are not going to draw a clear line that would make your staff excited, involved, and deliberately, not casually so, but formally so, part of your strategy, then it's creating an environment that within time it might take.
You're planning to fail because you haven't planned deeply enough for the involvement of the foot soldiers of the business. Yeah,
correct.
Ephraim, I'm going to let you go, my brother. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your call. John is in Craig Hall Park. Hey, John.
Hey, good to hear your voice always.
Indeed. Thank you so much. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm sure you know this subject's very close to my heart.
Sure.
Two quick anecdotes from a program called Team Business. It's a commercial training program for laborer and first-line supervisor level. There are two little anecdotes that I'll tell you about. What they really do is with that laborer level, they by a hands-on procedure, they actually teach them the implications of a cash book. Cash in, where does it come from? And cash out, where's the money spent? One of their clients went as far as placing the month's cash book on the notice board as a result of the impact that made on their first-line supervisors and the laborer level. The second anecdote is about a little micro business. It was one of these modular buildings where you have a whole lot of different businesses, and the business was fairly successful.
Yep.
It grew. They finally didn't have enough space. And luckily, they were able to hire the module next door, so they were just separated. They moved one half of the manufacturing into the newly hired part and spent quite a lot of time moving the partly manufactured goods into the other part of the factory. The suggestion to go to the landlord and knock a hole through the wall, that came from one of the laborers.
Yeah. Wow.
So if you don't involve your laborer level,
Yep.
you are missing a huge
Yep.
asset.
Yeah, yeah.
Cheers. Good night.
Good night, John in Craig Hall Park. On X, Chimbuzi says, regarding strategy, is HR department part of the strategy? I doubt it. I doubt it's always viewed as support services. Yet these are the guys who are tasked with recruiting the people who are fit for purpose. And it brings me to what you've already spoken to about the difference between strategy and operations, right? And it appears to me that the strategy needs to be clear enough to understand what's the work to be done
Yeah.
in order to develop an effective operational process.
Yeah.
And that means understanding what and who at which level of competency needs to do what
Yeah.
in the organization. How do you envision that? Do you envision that before the operations start, or do you fail forward? In other words, do you start